So our first question we're going to start off with here today is, how do we engage in ethical conversations without fear, guilt, or avoidance? Now, this is something that will come up in the scenario, especially when you're preparing for your ACC or PCC exam. They will have a question around a situation where the coach is put in a place where they kind of have to make a choice, and the coach doesn't really want to make a choice, because if they make a choice, it feels like they are doing something, might be against their own values, might be against the client's best interest, or might just feel uncomfortable. So there may be cases where we feel like we need to avoid an ethical conversation, but there will be cases that we feel that it's okay, if it feels it's okay. Right. So this is something to think about when we are preparing for our ethical conversations as well. Okay. So something to just open up the conversation to think about. Now, today we're going to dive in straight into this idea of care to commit. This has to do with our part 3 of the entire Code of Ethics, where a huge component of the Code of Ethics revolves around this idea of care, caring for the clients. And you'll find that there's a lot of different sub-points or sub-considerations as well when ICF considers what it means to really care for the client and also care for the coaching process. So the big question we ask ourselves here is, how do we really care, or how do we demonstrate care, or our duty of care? It's easy to kind of say, oh, okay, this is what care really is, or that's what care really is. But what exactly is care? So let's hear everyone. What is care to you? For yourself, what is care in a coaching context for you? Anyone? Everyone in the morning hasn't awake. Okay, so we have some. Gordon says empathy. Steven says empathy, taking care of the client's feelings. Desmond says client support. Chris says wanting the client to achieve objectives, and Tiang says empathy. Now, this is something interesting. In the context of, say, for example, emotional intelligence and other parts of different domains of science, the idea of empathy kind of showcase care, but care and empathy are two different things, very, very different things. Empathy, you can think of it more of your response to the evolving situation or to the other individual. Care is something that you can proactively give. Empathy is a reactive response. I cannot give empathy until I know what's happening on the other side. But care, I can prepare care and can show care way before even I meet the client. So care, it's more proactive, and empathy, it's more of a response, reactionary kind of response to whatever that's emerging from the context of the client's conversation. So which means that from a proactive stance, I can actually prepare something to respond to the client, or I can prepare something to support the client, or I can frame the conversation to support the client. So when you see the word care in the ICF context, you think of it more of a proactive action done by the coach. So when you read these scenarios as well, think of it as, what is the coach doing? Not reacting to, but more of what's the coach doing. Okay, so think in terms of the context of care as, what am I doing to support the client? That's the care. Okay, so and one of the things that when you look at ICF as a whole, the idea of care comes from the place of values and ethics. We talk about the 4 core values, and then the ethics, or the realm of ethics, and even that silence that we give the client, it's also the space of care for them. So when we think of care as a whole, it's not just what I'm doing in response, but how am I doing it to support the clients? Okay. And even in that space of silence, that's what we're creating. We call this a space for the client, or the space for trust, safety to kind of blossom in the process of coaching conversation. Yeah. So too often, many coaches focus on, how do I create space? But if we get, before creating space, it's about creating that sanctuary for the client to feel, I want to be there. And that's where care comes in. So care is that active, proactive measures that the coach take to really support the client, to allow the client to come in. And then when the client responds, or when the client shows up, or when the client reacts to certain context or stories or narrative of the situation, Then the coach applies empathy according to what the client is sharing at the moment. Okay, so that's care. Okay, with that as a backdrop, now we can understand how the evolution of the part 3 of the ICF Code of Ethics come about. So the part 3 of the Code of Ethics is all about commitment for all within the ICF ecosystem. And if you recall the last session, we talked about the different family organizations within the ICF. And when we see all within ICF ecosystem, we also refer to the clients, the stakeholders, and those that will come in contact with the coach or the coaching relationships. So you see this part here where the values are aspirational and a robust guide for ethical reasoning and decision making, and all within the ICF ecosystem expect to honor and uphold these values in all their professional interactions. So this sense of commitment actually stems from the idea of care. So when you think about care in the ICF context, so let me just write here. Care is the commitment of the coach, okay, to the client and to the coaching profession and also to the coaching process. So when you see words like how is the coach supporting the client or committing the client, and that's where you see the word care coming up. Okay. So there are a few lines here that we're going to take. We're going to open it up a little bit more in detail. And the first one is that we mindfully perform our duties with integrity, accountability by thinking globally, being courageous in our thoughts, actions, and speech, being aware of our impact, and bearing the responsibility of any consequence. So notice that there's quite a lot of things here, right? So one, it's the duties of care for the client. Next, it's also a few layers. One, it's about the global thinking of how this impacts not just what you do in the session with the client, but the repercussions of that on a global scale. So, for example, recently there's some coaches that go on LinkedIn and say that I see this or that is better, or this model is better, or that process is better, or they go online and talk a lot about their client stories, right? So when they do that, they impede or they kind of breach the privacy confidentiality agreement with the client, because they go online and say, oh, I have the client this and then the client that, but without having confirmation from the client whether they have permission to share. And so this impacts the global body of coaching, which is then clients or organizations think that that's okay, because when someone does that, it has a repercussion impact. So when you read the scenario, there may be cases where it talks about the repercussion of an action of a coach, even though the coach thinks that, oh, it's for my marketing purposes, but there is a repercussion impact on that. Okay, so thinking globally, being courageous in thoughts, actions, and speech, and being aware of our impact on the client. Okay, so let me just go a little bit more in this part here, what it really is. So, which means that our influence, it's on a global scale, whether we like it or not, because we're dealing with our clients. So we have to be aware of our influence, and especially across cultural and social and emotional contexts. So think of this as, if I were to put this, also our social presence, branding, and also our or social influence, right? And sometimes we can call this the capital. Okay. So some of us may have very, very good presence online, or may have very good presence with our stakeholders. And so the influence on them would also create that space for clients to know how we deal with clients in a very ethical manner. So a simple case is this. When you think about doctors and their patients, we don't see doctors going online and discussing about their patient's case. You know, for example, if I'm a doctor and Guru is my patient, and I go online and say, oh, recently I met this patient, and the patient was saying this, and I transformed the patient's life, and then after that patient was so happy, overjoyed. You don't see doctors going online on LinkedIn or anywhere talking about this, because there's a patient there's a patient confidentiality as well. So in the very same way for coaching as well, there's also a coaching confidentiality. To what degree we can share, or to what degree should we not share? Okay, so Chris has a question.
Godan has the same question as me. We were wondering whether when, for example, the coach actually shares some valuable lessons and impact on a person without naming him, wouldn't that be considered okay?
That is also not okay.
Also
That's
not okay.
yeah, that's also not ethical.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
it's unethical when a coach shares their own personal experience that they did with a client, even if the client has great success.
No, no, we are not mentioning the person.
Even if you don't
We're just,
mention, yeah,
oh,
even if,
really? Yeah.
yeah, that's a breach. That's a breach of ethics.
I find it very strange. Let's say I'm a coach and then
Mm,
I have successfully done some things
mm.
and I would like other people to gain from that experience and I just share the experience, what I did with that client and the client actually did something well. Wouldn't that be something?
That is also a breach.
Oh,
Whether it's
really?
a,
Yeah.
yeah,
Wow.
it's a severe breach of ethics,
Wow.
and yeah, you'll be liable of the which means that your credential may put potentially be at stake as well. Now, let me explain why, even if in a good case, it's so a breach of ethics. Because regardless whether it's good or bad, unless the client has given you very, very clear permission to share the stories, then you
Okay,
can
that's
hide the
what
name.
Andy just asked. Yeah. So if you get permission from the client, then it's okay.
Yeah, if the client gives
Oh,
you permission, that's okay. But if the
oh,
client
okay.
doesn't give you permission to explicitly share online, so for example, let's say you're my client, and then we had a very good coaching session, and then you had breakthroughs, and I feel like I want to share this online. I need to come to you first. I say, hey, Chris, can I have a permission to share our success? I will not share the content, but I'll just share the success. I will hide your name as well. Would that be okay? Then I go online and share, and then on when I'm sharing, I have to state that the client has explicitly given me permission to share this, but in view of confidentiality and details of the contents, I'll hide the client's name. Mm. Okay, so this is very important. You see this in the scenario coming. You also see this in the scenario. Permission must be given in some way, but permission must also be articulated in some way. So, especially for online media, I need to have kind of explicit permission, and I need to state that again. So, if you see a lot of my videos on YouTube as well, at the start, I'll say again, I say thank you, whoever who allows me to record the session again, right? So that audiences heard that permission has been given, even though it's being recorded. Okay. Yes. So and this yes. So permission has to be asked and must be the permission has to be recorded in some way. So in the coaching recording per se, that's why I encourage all of us to say this at the start, which is thank you for allowing me to record the session for the purpose of the ICF credentialing, so that there is a confirmation that I know that permission has been given by the client, or a written confirmation from the client itself. That means a waiver to kind of release your information online. Guru, you had a question?
Sorry, Jaded, I had a
Yep.
follow-up question on that. You this is per recording you spoke about, but is it possible to have a kind of permission in an agreement format when you're doing the coaching agreement itself? The reason I'm asking is, even in other businesses, sometimes I'm working for a corporate client, B2B, and I want the public to know that I'm working for them. I cannot actually take their name unless until I have explicit permission from them. But normally, sometimes we will do a contract where we will say that we will be able to use your anonymous case. So then the client gives okay to it, then we can go ahead and do it. So we don't have to do it on a session by session basis. Is that something that we can cover?
Yes, you can cover that in your contract, which is your remember your coaching agreement. You have say 10 sessions. You can say that up front with the client.
Yeah.
However, there's a caution there. We have what we call the do good principle, which is even though it's in the contract, I can do it. I can share that, but as a gesture of courtesy, I would kind of let the client know again, especially if the source or the material is going to be shared more broadly. Say, for example, on a marketing basis.
Yeah.
For example, if today, right, in the streets of Singapore, you're walking, and maybe the news media start filming you. Okay, and because you're in the public area, they can film anybody. So, but somehow your face is there, and maybe that day, maybe you were very tired, and then maybe the face was not so nice. So then they take your picture and then put it online. They say, "Oh, this is the average worker working in Singapore, looking so tired." Then they spin the story.
Yeah.
Now, and then technically, the news media agency would need to have reached out to you to be okay, to be featured like that. Yeah, because now the exposure of the original source is going to a larger audience. Yeah, and so I need to be clear about how I'm going to use that media to the client, and also to be respectful for them. Otherwise, you get unsolicited kind of things from them. Because again, even if I wrote there, I say that you give waiver for me to use your name, your likeness of name, or
Mm-hmm.
the context and achievements for social media and stuff, or maybe online, or for personal branding. The if in the courts, the client can also argue that it has crossed the boundary,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, for certain things, right? So all this have you have to be mindful of what is okay, what's not okay, and then in the context of the law of the land in Singapore, it may be okay, but if you go across the shore in Malaysia or in other parts of the world, it may not be okay.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's a very, very fine line. But what I meant to say is that it's a good practice to put it in a coaching agreement, because you're in a way kind of covering out yourself, just in case. But you're right; it's a very, very gray area where, how do you know you're crossing the line? So I think that calls for a lot of accountability on self.
Yes, yes. And then you see the scenarios as well. And especially if you see the scenario having the scope of influence or the scope of reach, it's larger. Say, for example, if I just put the achievement in my CV, it's not going to go anywhere. It's just going to go for my CV. The scope of reach is not as wide as, for example, if I'm going to use your material and I'm going to do marketing, I'm going to pay ads, right? And then that will be a different feature altogether, and that will also mean that I need to have a duty of care to be understanding and also be careful of how I'm sharing this content from the client, even hiding the name. Now, another way you can circumnavigate this, say for example, the client didn't give you permission, and but you want to share some good lesson learned in a way that doesn't compromise client confidentiality with you. What you can do, you can also do this, which is some coaches will do this. They stay upfront and say, okay, what I'm about to share, it's based on real life experiences, but the situation, the content, the context have all been fictionalized. So if I say everything has been fictionalized, it's inspired by real world events, then you can share whatever you want. So I will not say that all my past clients. I will just give a fictitious name. The content and the context are totally fictitious, very, very different from what the client experienced, but the lesson learned is the same. Then that's fine, because now the concealment of whatever happened in the conversation is kept confidential. So the likeness cannot be drawn even from what I'm sharing.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about social media, but I was referring more than social media. It's about, when you're sharing a session, because you're bringing out your experience, what you're knowing, to another session, which is not so wide. It's
Mhm.
it's within a closed environment, right? So
Yep.
I guess you're right. It's a very gray area. It depends upon how you manage it.
Yeah. So think about it as the scope of influence and also how wide your reach is going to go. And if you're sharing, it's within the context, it's still fine, right? For lesson learned as well, if you want to share lesson learned with a group of people, outwards and everything, you could still share that. But trying to maneuver the story in the context in a way to let everyone know that it's inspired by real events. I will modify certain things so that everybody understands that it's not entirely taken out from the actual conversation itself. Okay, so Stephen says, what if two similar situations and one has given permission to share, but the other one did not? When person B heard it, he thought he had breached confidentiality. So that's where at the start of the conversation, especially when I'm sharing, I would say, I've been given permission by this client to share this story. And if the contents or the context of the story sounds similar to yours, it's entirely coincidental. Okay. And because I've been given permission by this client to share. So that will avoid cases where you have two similar situations or three or four similar situations with the same story. And that's why I say at the start it's always important to state upfront that I've been given permission by XXX client. Now it will also be even better if the client's name is say for example today I had a coaching session with Chris, and then Chris had a breakthrough, and I asked Chris. Chris says he doesn't mind me sharing the breakthrough, and then I asked him, would it be okay for me to also quote your name in my am I sharing, right? So that others, in case others have similar experiences, they know that it's not referring to them, as more referring to the story. Would that be okay for you, right? So then that will help to clear the doubt of individuals who may think that I'm talking about them. Yeah. Okay. So good questions. So just be careful when you read the question itself. There's two key factors. Let me just write here. One, scope of impact or influence or reach. Okay. And then the other, it's permission. Okay. So to what degree of permission has been given for you to be able to share that? So when you read the particular scenario, just be careful of which one it is referring to. Reach, permission, non-permission given. Okay. So good questions from everyone. Yeah. So here, that's where we say that for part one of, we call this section, part 3, section 1 or section 3, where it says that about having that courage to voice out truths or to voice out boundaries. And for many coaches, it's also very, very important to hold that accountability at the highest possible level, right, where possible, because others are also watching, and they will use you as a benchmark of what is possible, what is not possible. Just like the videos that we're doing here as well. I'm doing this also for people who are outside and people who are who don't have the ability to attend classes, and also individuals who have different disabilities. So we're supporting even a visually impaired individual, so they're listening to these recordings to really help them prepare for the exams as well. Yeah. So we let everybody know what's the purpose, the scope, and also what we're doing. Okay. So that's part 1. Okay. So very, very good discussions here. Now let's go to part 2. Okay. So part 2, it's this idea of commit to excellence through continued professional or personal, professional, and ethical development. The first 2 is quite straightforward, which is your own personal development, courses that you attend, professional development, things you do, for example, ICF credentialing. But this part here, ethical development, it's something that very, very few people talk about, or very few people actually do. So what is ethical development? Ethical development is something like what we're doing here. We're discussing some ethical challenges, dilemmas, possible ethics issues that might arise. So ethical dilemma is building your courage within when faced with certain circumstances and situations to question and ask ourselves, is what we're doing, even if it's permissible, is it upholding the boundaries of ethics to its highest level? So some things are permissible, but what can I do to really demonstrate excellence in those areas as well? So something to think about, yeah? So excellence is not fixed destination, but it's that dynamic state shaped by learning and feedback and humility. And the commitment reminds us that ethical development is as important as skill development. So the coaching profession evolves, so must our inner compass. So a great ethical development would review itself in excellence in what we're doing. So when we say the spirit of excellence is the spirit of ethical development in the context of coaching itself. Because skill level development, everyone can do it. You just practice more skill, you learn more things. Personal development, you can do some personal reflections, growth, get some coaching. But ethical development, this is something that it's where it will raise the standards and excellence to a higher degree. Yeah. So you see here, ethical development includes regular reflection, engaging with dilemmas, learning from ethical missteps. ICF, in the ICF portal, there is a community group for ethics, and it's open to all ICF members. So that's where they discuss a lot on a regular basis, a lot of different cases. On the ICF website as well, there are many case studies as well, so which is open and free for all coaches to go and look at different case studies, which you can use to kind of reflect and learn about ethical missteps as well. Okay, so for example, a coach enrolled in a mentor coaching program and realizes that their urge to solve the client was tied to a deeper fear of being perceived as ineffective. What should you do? Okay, so sometimes this may happen, which is whether it's in the mentor coaching process or it is in the coaching process, the urge is that, wow, I'm 40 minutes in the conversation, but we seem to be circling and there's no value. I feel like there's no value. I feel like there's no solution. I feel like there's nothing, no answers yet. So As the role of the coach, I feel that I'm ineffective. So at the point of time, should I jam the session with more powerful insights? What should I do? So there's something to think about in the context as well. Okay, so let's ask the question: what would you do if you are faced in this situation where 30 minutes, 40 minutes in a conversation, nothing's being done. You try the coaching process, nothing being done. You feel that urge. What would you do in this process? Okay, so Guru says, in an ever-evolving world, ethics and sometimes meaning what is ethical can change. And I guess it's important for self-ethical development from time to time to reset your own barometer of ethics. Yes, and so that's why it's important. You know, what seems that's why I say what seems permissible. At the end of the day, you are the coach who holds that standards to the highest level. Yeah. So I'll always be very careful and conscious about even in the space of sharing client success, even if it's good. But have I violated or have I crossed the boundary without the client's permission? Okay, good. Any questions here for commit to excellence? Okay, then let's go to the next part. So part 3, remain alert to cultural filters and demonstrates respect for cultures different from our own through open conversations about cross-cultural and multicultural differences. So there are a lot of different words here. Okay, now one, it's this idea of cross-cultural, and the other, it's multicultural. And there's another one, cultural filters. Okay, so there's several words here that seem to be at play. So here, in the context of coaching, ethics also it's culturally impacted or culturally influenced. If we go back in time, or if ethics were all developed, say for example, in a Aboriginal setting, it'll be different, or in a Polynesian setting, it'll be different, or in an archipelagic society or islands, it'll be very different. So it's very, very influenced by the culture. And so, for example, in Singapore, people perceive Singapore to be a city of fines, a lot of fines, a lot of laws, regulations, and stuff. But if you ask Singaporeans, would that be okay for them? Most of them will be generally okay with the rules. Why? Because it kind of reduce public nuisance. We don't want people on the streets to put their chewing gum everywhere. You don't be sitting on the seats of the train, realizing that your pants is stuck with chewing gum, right? So there's certain consideration from a cultural perspective. So ethics then is bounded with culture. So what feels safe and respectful and empowering in one culture may be inappropriate in another. So the principle pushes coaches to go beyond cultural tolerance to cultural curiosity. And this is a very, very important concept. Okay, so we call this moving to cultural curiosity, which is just this hunger to kind of learn, allow the other person to teach you about their culture, allow the other person to teach you how to address them better. So we are not meant to be culturally neutral, but culturally responsive. So some coaches go to the extent they say, "Oh, okay, I'm neutral, right? That doesn't matter. I'll be very, very neutral. I'm a neutral party." In the coaching context, it's not about being neutral. It's about being responsive. Because if I'm so neutral, the client feels like, "Wow, I'm just talking to a AI. Like this coach is not responsive. This coach has no empathy. This coach doesn't care for me." So the key idea here is to be responsive to the client and not to be neutral. Okay? So it's okay to recognize that we have our own cultural biases, which means that, for example, maybe in my culture, I believe in giving space or being very quiet. I will not speak. I'll allow the other person to speak fully. But yet, in a culturally responsive manner in the conversation, because I'm supporting the client, I may have to step out from my space of silence to support the client. See, for example, the client is from a different culture who likes talking, who likes quick conversation. Then I have to change my nuance or my conversational style to match the client. So here, two key pillars. One is cultural filters, which are our invisible assumptions that we carry about gender, roles, time, communication, leadership. Let me talk here also. Leadership. More recently, family, relationships. And in the context of, let's say, for example, in Asia, a lot to do with career. Right? Career. and generations. So you see all this and also language, yeah, language, and think about traditions. Okay, so there are some traditions that are unique to different cultures. There's some language that are also very interesting to the different cultures. Now, that's where we consider that we apply the idea of open conversation does not mean that it's just very, very open, but it conveys the sense of humility without being defensive. And it's about being very open and honest. As, hey, I'm not sure how should I approach this, or am I intruding too much in your space, right? Or have I overstepped the boundary? Yeah. So as a coach, notice a client differs. Okay, so for example, right, a coach notices a client differs often and avoids direct questions. Instead of labeling this as passive, the coach explores whether this aligns with the client's cultural values around hierarchy and expressions. So this is especially so if I'm coaching someone from a totally different culture. I need to be mindful of how that particular culture expresses and how they see things. So it will be useful for you to kind of learn more about culture from a cross-cultural perspective. Now, then we come to this idea, cross-cultural and multicultural. What is the difference? You have some cultures where they are one or two cultures within the society, and they have to now engage across culture, which they're not used to. For example, in Singapore, we are multicultural, but we're not entirely multicultural because the main four cultures are Chinese, Malay, Indian, Eurasians, but we don't have other cultures as much, right? So when we meet other cultures, let's say for example, Central Asian culture, someone from Central Asia, now we're doing cross-cultural from a multicultural perspective. Okay, so multicultural means that in this space, I'm already associated to this very, very multicultural kind of diverse setting. But when I go across culture, which I'm not familiar with, then that's going across culture. So therefore, there's the difference between cross-cultural and multicultural differences between what I'm familiar with. So for societies which are multicultural, we think we are very culturally sensitive. We think, but we may not be. Okay, because just because we are multicultural doesn't mean that we are automatically very culturally sensitive. So there's something to think about as well. Yeah. Okay, good. Any questions here? So yes, so in Singapore, it's a very unique thing, right? This is the Singapore culture, and what really is the Singapore culture, and how do others perceive us? So I've heard from friends overseas that think of Singapore as very snobbish, very demanding from a customer perspective. I recently read a survey of the type of customers that is the worst to handle, and then Singaporeans are number one, right? Are the worst customers to handle globally. So it's quite interesting to read that survey. I can understand why, because there's a certain level of excellence that we demand of customer service, at least in Singapore, right? So think about this: cultural and multicultural and cross cultural. What happens in that impact? Good. Any questions here for culture? No? Okay. Now, another part of culture, it's also what we don't see a lot. It's generational culture. So you have different groups or subgroups, and sometimes we call it subculture within a larger culture. For example, even in the Singapore culture, you have subcultures. You have the cultures that really enjoy retro music. You have some cultures that really enjoy nostalgia. Some cultures that really enjoy the tradition. You have some cultures that really enjoys the, for example, modern gaming culture. Right. So they rather than or newspaper reading culture. I met individuals who says, "Oh, we should go green. No more printing of newspapers." But yet, I met individuals say, "Hey, the printing of newspapers actually bring us together because I can touch, I can feel the carbon on my fingers, I can have discussions with the different generations." So you have all those different elements that come into play, right? And when you read the question itself, just be mindful that of your own cultural lens and how you're interpreting the scenario. Tiang says, are we expected to do some homework about client's culture before engaging them? Yes, yes. You're expected to do some pre-homework about the client's culture, especially if I'm from an existing culture that I know I'm very, very stuck in. I definitely need to read more about the other culture. And what are some ways and avenues to kind of read about other culture? You can go online, and I'll share with you guys one of the sites that I found it quite useful. It's called the Globe Project. Um, and this Globe Project kind of like give you a little bit insight into the different cultures around the world. But this is just around the world. Yeah. And so this research kind of give you a little insight into the different kind of ideas or cultural responses from different parts of the world. So you will see different articles from here, which I think is very, very good. You can read more about it. And the studies that they have done, fantastic. So go and read about it. Much better than many of the other studies that I've come across or books online. A lot of the books online are um, they're kind of like a watered down version, very much marketing books rather than a real study. So this is a real study that's done across 150 countries. So very, very good book to buy if you want to learn more about culture. Okay, so join it. I think every 10 years or so, they do another update. So right now they're in the 2020 version of it, and they're going to do more. Yeah. So this is just across the country. There is also another kind of culture which will be useful, which is understanding the generational culture. So I may want to kind of spend time learning about the generations underneath me, maybe the Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and there are there publications out there. Yeah, there are. Okay, so um, okay, let me just share with you. Okay, so one of the things that I enjoy is to go to the website where you can find all these things here. Okay, so for example, in under the Ministry of Development in Singapore, at least. So I use a lot more Singapore context because here you can kind of read a lot about the considerations and the impact of it. There are different resources on the website from the government itself where they talk about the different frontier of the consideration. So you can read some of this here, and you can understand how this are being impacted by the culture of that groups. Okay, so Ministry of National Development is a very good one. You can also find the Ministry of Youth as well, Youth and Culture, and that would also give you some insights of the culture within Singapore space. So one of the things that Singapore government has done quite extensively is kind of explore in different subgroups and put a lot of the research there online. So to get a chance to read it, and I think it'd be useful to kind of understand that. The ASEAN framework as well, if you guys have been to the ASEAN website, ASEAN has the ASEAN, for those of international audience, it's the Association for Southeast Asian Nations. And there you can read a lot about different Southeast Asian nations' culture, value systems, and also understanding ASEAN's how they bring across cross-cultural and multicultural understanding across very, very diverse countries and nations. The idea of non-interference all can be found there. So I would encourage all of us to kind of read that if you have a chance, right? So get the chance to read that. Now, you may come across situations where there's no way to do homework about them. For example, if today someone is coaching someone who is outside of the military, have no idea how you're working, have to coach someone in the military, but there's no information about it. So how do we kind of do it? Well, in those situations, it's good and useful to have the initial first few minutes of the conversation to allow the other person to share with you their context of the organization, the inner workings, the leadership style, the current situation. So allow the first 5-10 minutes to allow the other person to share a little bit more, so you can understand roughly what it is, and then I will frame the session to allow the other person to know, to say, hey, try this as we proceed through these coaching sessions. I may not be so familiar with the culture within the context of the organization, so feel free to stop me to provide me with more cultural context if I'm missing anything. Okay, so allow the client to know that I have a limitation in my homework gathering of of their own organizational culture. Okay, so that's good. Any questions here? Okay, so great insights and discussions here. And let's go to the next part, number 4. Maintain awareness of relationships and how they are influenced by factors including biases, power dynamics, and forms of systemic oppression, and actively address these factors through continuing education and open conversation. A lot of big words here, and I would say the more important one for us, at least in the Asian context, it's the idea of biases, okay, or biases, and power dynamics. The idea of systemic oppression, it's more of a Western thing, although parts of Asia do have, but it's less kind of like less kind of influenced, or we have less of this influence, at least within the context of Asia, than in the West. Okay, biases and power dynamics are stronger, at least in Asia, especially power dynamics. So if you are coaching someone down or coaching upwards, the consideration of power dynamics have to be aware, so that you can understand what the client is trying to tell you, but not saying. Okay, so for example, biases, status, privilege, of how we are seen, heard, or felt trusted must be addressed, so that the client feels open to share. So power doesn't mean it's bad, but it's the unexamined power that distorts the relationship. So what this means as well is that just because I'm a professional coach and it seems that I have some expertise, the client may invariably just take whatever the coach say and just do without reflecting for themselves. And that's why it's important for the coach to let the client know that the expertise in the domain knowledge rests with the client. The expertise in the process knowledge is where the coach is supporting the client through the coaching process. So allowing the client to understand that the requisite knowledge and the requisite information and the expertise still rests with the client, okay, and the client's resources. Now, also addressing these forces is not about trying to be politically correct, but also about ethically aligning for the client's safety. So I've heard some coaches in the recording where they are very, very correct about what they say. So they don't try to, so it ends up being that the questions and conversations feels very, very robotic, or feels very disjointed, or feels that there's no human touch or human connection, because it sounds very, very politically correct. So it's important for us to kind of be careful of not overly editing ourselves or filtering ourselves, to have that open conversation with the client. Yeah. Okay. So for example, this is one more for the West, right? A white coach working with a client of color notices that the client often edits themselves, and the coach respectfully invites a conversation whether the coaching space truly feels safe to express raw emotions or culturally specific narratives. In the context, in Asia context, if you're coaching someone young, say for example, someone in their youth or even younger, the tendency is that they would tell you, I don't know, right? Don't know. Or they'll use like their generation's lingo or colloquialism to express certain things, where it feels like they're avoiding the question, but actually that's not avoidance. That's more about how they tend to respond to anything. Okay, so something to think about as well, about how we maintain our relationships. Okay, good. Anyone that had any experiences before with different biases or power dynamics in your conversation context? Anyone? No? Okay. Well, you meet more of them, especially if you're doing across different verticals, and you're coaching different generations as well. You meet more of them. Okay. Now the question sets may also come. So when you read the questions, you may come across questions like this as well, right? Where you're coaching a younger person, or when you're coaching upwards, someone who's older, more senior. What should you do in those situations? Yep. Okay. Good. Any questions here? No. Okay, let's go to the next one. Cultivate our ethical growth and maturity through continuous self-reflection and increased self-awareness. If an ethical dilemma arises, we will pursue assistance where needed to resolve the matter. Okay, so what is this? It's all about how the coach builds the ethical practice. So remember, ethical development. Okay, the how. Okay, so this is basically how the coach should be developing themselves. Okay. And one way it's to kind of do continuous discussions, reflections, and that's why ICF as a whole has this mandatory 3 hours, especially for those of you doing renewal. You need at least 3 hours of ethics. So for this program itself, some of us are doing renewal, some of us are doing certifications, but the ethics discussions that we're doing here actually supports for your renewal credentialing itself. You know? So ethical maturity, it's that quiet skill of noticing discomfort before damage occurs. And it looks at your inner dialogue with your ego as well. Okay? So it allows you to pause before you say for certain that this is the way to go. Okay. And the thing to know about this is, especially when we have many years of experience dealing with different ethical cases, it's for us to take conscious pauses, to take a step back and ask ourselves, are we overly reliant on our past experiences to make that decision? Or are we conscious about how we are making those decisions? Yeah. Okay. Good. Number 6, respectfully attempt to communicate our concerns with others if we become aware of unethical conduct by them, and if necessary, seek ethical guidance for the next step. So, what is the them? The them is the client or stakeholders or others. If we notice some concerns with anything that's happening around us, we have to kind of confront some of these boundaries or some of these emerging challenges that might happen. And this could come in the form of when you hear the client sharing something that is happening in the workplace that feels that it contravenes certain ethical norms or guidelines, and that's where you got to raise up to the client and say, hey, it sounds like there's something that is amiss here, and I'd like to address that. So the courage to confront, it's important. Even the courage to break off the coaching relationship is also important. Okay. Now, because sometimes in the organization context, the HR department may ask the coach, can you tell me what's happening for this particular person? Can you give me insights about this person? Then you realize that the HR practitioner is trying to scoop out insights from you so that they can make a case against this individual. So you're faced with two things. If you don't tell, you risk the HR not choosing you to be the provider, to be the coach in future. So you may lose a client. The other hand, if you uphold the standards, then you risk the chance of if you don't uphold standards, you risk the chance of actually violating a lot of the ethical principles that you uphold. Okay, so for example, a coach sees a peer post confidential client details on social media for marketing. So rather than gossiping or posting back, they reach out privately to express concern and offer support in course correcting. So for example, if I see someone online and I notice, oh, okay, that's definitely a violation, or that's a questionable action done by a coach, what should I do online? Okay. Yeah. So then that's where you should raise it up. Okay. Yep. So today, a lot of coaches that goes online, they say, they use like false marketing. They say, if you're a coach, speaker, or whatever, what if you can create more impact? What if you can generate more income? If I see something like this and I notice that this is an overpromise and it crosses the line of false marketing, scamming, and very misleading information, I got to raise it up. Where do we see this a lot? We see this a lot in Asia, especially for misleading marketing claims about coaching or what coaching can do. Right. So, for example, if you go online, you can see a lot of misleading claims. And a scenario could be that you saw a post, a sponsored post, where the coach claims that after 10 sessions, you experience transformation. Can we guarantee that? Can we guarantee a 10-session transformation? Right. So this is something to look at as well. Okay. So you may come across questions like this. A coach proposes online that by attending their coaching, individuals will experience definite breakthroughs. So can we guarantee breakthroughs as well? Okay, so something to think about. Okay, so sometimes some coaches, they would like to guarantee breakthrough. Some coaches, they say, okay, money back guarantee if you have no breakthrough. So this is something that I would say very, very careful of how we word certain things that we do online. Okay, because not all clients are made the same, which means that not all clients will be cooperative. So if you make a large claim like this, we have to be mindful of how it's being conveyed across. Okay, so that's number 6. Number 7, communicate with those who need to be informed of ethical responsibilities established by this code or the code of ethics here by providing access to this code of ethics. Okay, so this is where sometimes if you meet organizations and clients, say for example, you're working for an organization, it's useful for you to send them this copy of the ICF code of ethics. Let them read, let them understand that you are bounded by this. In the same way, for doctors as well, some organizations, they have engaged in-house doctors. And even if it's an in-house doctors, the doctors are bounded by the doctor's duty of care. So there's an ethical kind of document for doctors to also abide by. Okay, so transparency, that's why we say transparency is a very important part of ethical coaching. And the ethical coach is one that will kind of allow the clients to know when they are breaching the or when it's acceptable, when it's not acceptable, and allowing the client to also understand that the coach will raise and make explicit whatever that is seems unethical. Okay, so this is to really build and reinforce the accountability. Yeah. Okay, so like what I mentioned earlier, the reason why we're doing this, it's a lot to do with building that trust, building that that scope. So especially when engaging a sponsor and engaging organization, let them know ahead of time what is your preference, what is your boundaries. Okay, good. Now, finally, number 8, accept that behaving ethically means going beyond what is written in the code of ethics. So which means that not everything will be covered in the code of ethics. Right, which is what we discussed earlier. Like some things are just so it's not possible to craft everything down in writing. So what should we do in those situations? What can we do in those situations? Yeah. Okay. So the question that we ask ourselves is, what is the most honorable thing, or what's the most respectful thing to do in this situation, or what is the do good principle in this situation? So that's where it calls back to your own ethical compass, own ethical guiding system, where what seems permissible, but yet what should you do in those situations? Okay, good. Any questions so far from this 8 different codes? Okay, so these are the 8 from section number 3 here. Okay, so here, commitment of for all within the ICF code ecosystem, and this part here, it's where a lot of questions will come from. And there will be a lot of questions that seems like, oh, I never thought about this before, very ambiguous, right? So this part here is going to be very, very challenging.